Hello, I'm Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeform, a world that just might work. And I'm going to be speaking today with Lauren Windsor, executive producer of The Undercurrent, executive director of American Family Voices. And we're talking today about her new documentary, Gonzo for Democracy. And you can learn more at Lauren Windsor, LaurenWindsor, Lauren Windsor, all one word.com. On Freeform, we explore the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, economics, environment, science, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn, and podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TerrenceMcNally.net, Terrence McNally, all one word.net. Needless to say, we're deep into election season. I encourage you to get involved not only with candidate campaigns, but also with efforts to fight voter suppression and assure all Americans their right to vote, as if the future depends on it, which it very much does. And for those of you in, quote, safe states like California, where the presidential race may be a foregone conclusion for one party or the other, you can make a difference in down ballot races, help win congressional, state, local seats, and build the future of progressive office holders. And here's some specific recommendations. The Democratic Party and its candidates are far from perfect, but if we are to ever have again a viable multi-party system, I strongly recommend that you repudiate the Republican Party up and down the ballot for their anti-government, anti-democracy, voter-suppressing, minority-ruling ways. To get involved in campaigns, one organization I recommend is thirdact.org. Thirdact, one word.org, founded by Bill McKibben in 2021 to empower elders, those over 60 years old, to protect the climate and strengthen democracy. They're at thirdact, as I said, .org. And Third Act SoCal has launched a project called Adopt a District, so that voters in the safe state of California can work on 4 swing districts and help flip the House. California is usually ignored during national elections, but in this case, you can play a very important role. Other organizations you can plug into in battleground states is ourrevolution.com. That's one word, Our Revolution. That's the organization founded by Bernie Sanders. Also indivisible.org, mobilize.us, and so on. Look, get involved. To donate money, I highly recommend Movement Voter Project, who instead of you sending your money to the candidate campaigns or the Democratic Party, where they will spend most of it on marketing. That is, they will spend it on TV ads and expensive consultants. Movement Voter Project sends your money to grassroots, community-based organizations in key states who will be there before the election and they'll be there after the election, and they will get to voters that those national and big candidate campaigns never even notice. Back in 2012, the days of Occupy camps across the country, I met a young woman who didn't seem to fit the expected stereotype of an Occupy protester. And I'll let her tell us how she ended up there. We ran into each other now and then over the next year or two until she moved to the East Coast. And a while later, I began to see video reports of her catching politicians on the go with impromptu questions. You know, those scenes of people running up and down Senate hallways and that sort of thing. And then a bit later, new videos emerged where the subjects were caught unaware and blurted out things that you and I weren't supposed to hear. That woman is Lauren Windsor, and she's just produced a documentary, Gonzo for Democracy, that includes a number of her undercover scoops, but embeds them in a larger tale of the moment, of the millions of Americans who feel left out, down and out, or worse, and the politicians and political operatives who manipulate their feelings of loss and grievance in order to enact their right-wing agendas. And I believe the film tells 3, maybe 4 stories. The story of Lauren, who she is, why she does what she does. The story of her scoops, who she's caught, what they've admitted. The story of their Christian nationalist, white supremacist, anti-democratic minority rule agendas. And finally, the story of what to do to fight back. Lauren Windsor is the executive producer of The Undercurrent and Project Veritas Exposed, the executive director of American Family Voices, and a partner in Democracy Partners and Mike Lux Media. In the 2020 cycle, she was the deputy communications director for the Tom Steyer presidential campaign. And as I said, we're focusing on her new documentary, Gonzo for Democracy. Welcome, Lauren Windsor, to Freeform, a world that just might work.
Thanks for having me, Terrence.
Let me tell listeners, we're recording Wednesday, October 23rd. And as I almost always say at the start of these conversations, I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas that we talk about. And so can you tell us in your words how you see your path to the work you do today? Now, usually I say feel free to go way back, mentors, turning points, moments of decision. And in this case, since I feel this is kind of the first story of this, how did you end up doing what you're doing? Where did you come from? Who is this person?
So we could go all the way back to high school and college. You know, I always cared about politics. And, you know, when it came time to decide where to go for school, my initial major was in political science. But it was always between politics and fashion design. And after a year at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, I, was really just miserable and had the itch to go to New York. And so I pursued fashion design for several years. And there were a couple of, major, I think, turning points in my life. I witnessed 9/11 from ground zero. I moved back to Nashville, where I grew up, and finished my degree in business. And then I moved out to the West Coast to still pursue fashion design, and ended up being there for the ground zero, really, of the subprime mortgage collapse.
Mm-hmm.
My then boyfriend, his business was doing telemarketing for subprime mortgage companies.
Ugh.
Yeah, so we felt it before anybody else did, and it was really brutal. We ended up breaking up. He ended up moving home to regroup, and it was a struggle. So by the time Occupy rolled around in 2011, it was the movement I'd been waiting my entire life for. And I really felt compelled at that point, from my lived experience, that I needed to get involved in the political process. And so I became a protest junkie. I was traveling around the country. I had been a writer. I already had a blog called Lady Libertine.
Right.
An apartment in downtown Los Angeles. And I would walk down to the Occupy encampment, and I just offered my services as a writer and graphic designer to the media team. I remember one day somebody thrusting a camera in my hand and, just being like, "Oh, well, just go film the action, and somebody else will edit it." And, that's not really how it works. No one's going to just edit your footage. So, I became a self-taught videographer and, traveling around the country, documenting protests. I eventually pitched a web show to the Young Turks
Mm-hmm.
and launched it there with them, called The Undercurrent, which I still do today. But the very first episode that we did was the 1-year anniversary of Occupy Wall Street in New York. And then from that, a lot of the early interviews were doing interviews with advocates,
Mm-hmm.
other activists, but also politicians. But I realized quickly the way that I could differentiate myself from other people who were launching web shows was, I'm going to get on the record interviews with elected officials. I think my first real politician interview was with Maxine Waters and Jimmy Hoffa Jr.
Mm-hmm.
So, this was at a rally in, I forget what area of Los Angeles, but I think it was in Congresswoman Waters' district.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, the union was, I think, striking at the time. And so Hoffa was there and had appeared with with Waters. And so I was able to talk to both of them about what they were, there to be organizing against. That early sort of experience, like second episode in, I felt really good about that. So I was trying to produce a show where I had, a good mix of people to talk to, because it just, interviewing random activists, man on the street kind of stuff, I think some people do really well. But for me, I just found that people weren't really interested in that. People are interested in it, I think, if you're a comedian and you have like a comedic take, but as like a straight news thing, it was just not something that for me was that compelling.
I got it.
So I wanted to talk to newsmakers and break news. Can I get them to give me an answer to something that isn't out there? And so I really was trying to like hone questions and get into like the crux of issues to like, keep them from dodging questions, like really pin them down. So for the most part, it was like straight bird dogging.
Yeah.
When I moved to DC, I still continued to do the show, and it was pretty straightforward. Like, people knew I had a camera, they had a mic, and I was still like breaking news that way, though. The first week I was in DC, I had a clip with Louis Gohmert, where this is going to sound really quaint now, but at the time it was kind of a big deal. And I remember just, being in sort of grassroots circles on both the left and the right, because you remember that at the time the Tea Party activists were really the right-wing side of Occupy. Like, there was a lot of overlap there. There was like some convergence with the two movements. But anyway, I got Gohmert to talk about, it was something about Obama, and he said that President Obama should be impeached for it. And I think it was something about immigration, I want to say. And I remember talking to my then boss, but now business partner, Mike. And as soon as I said the word impeached, he said, "What?" He said he should be impeached. That's a big deal. And so we cut the video, and we ended up getting it placed on MSNBC. So it was newsworthy enough that like Ed Schultz had it on his show.
Yeah.
So,
this is heady stuff for someone that, a few months ago was just learning how to do this.
Well, yeah, early in my career. And so it's like, okay, I'm already like getting hits on MSNBC. This is a big deal. Within my first year in DC, I had a source materialize that gave me several hours of audio from a Koch brothers retreat. And so I went out to the retreat. I wasn't able to get in during the actual operating event, but I was, undercover, quote unquote, directly before the event. So that was one of the biggest stories of that particular news cycle, because we had audio on Mitch McConnell and this like crazy speech that he gave on campaign finance reform. He said that McCain-Feingold was the worst day of his political career. Oh. And you need to keep in mind that like this is a man who'd been in the Senate for, even at that time, like I think it was 30 years, and had been through the 2008 financial crisis, had been through 9/11, the Iraq War, all of this stuff. And, the passage of an obscure campaign finance bill was what he was telling these billionaire donors was the worst day of his political life. I wrote that story for The Nation, and we'd partnered with them on the exclusives for the audio. And the way that I wrote that, like saying basically, what I just said, ended up in a speech that Bill Clinton gave at the Harkin Steak Fry that year. So that was insane.
Yeah.
Undercover was something that I really only reserved for, if I couldn't do it any other way, like for ALEC conferences, American Legislative Exchange Council. Otherwise, I just show up at events with a camera and try to talk to people. But I'm aggressive, and I just, will show up and get into the press scrum and, fight for my questions. I will go toe-to-toe with anyone. But eventually, it just made more sense, particularly 2020, we're at the height of the pandemic, and I just returned from a a hiatus. I had taken a break to work on a presidential campaign. Tom Steyer's out
Right.
in San Francisco. I get back. Biden wins the election, but it's clear there's going to be this historic Senate runoff. And it was clear that Trump was not going to concede the election. It was just going to be a dogfight. I knew when they said that there was going to be this historic thing in Georgia. I was like, I need to be there. I want to be in all the action. I want to report on this and do whatever I can to expose, what they're doing. And sure enough, got down there and was able to break the news that Tommy Tuberville, who was then Senator-elect, that he wanted to challenge the Electoral College. The reason this was a big deal was because at the time, conventional wisdom was, this is a crazy thing going on over in the House, led by Freedom Caucus member Mo Brooks. It's not going to go anywhere. Everyone just dismissed it out of hand. But I'm hearing all of these surrogates. You've got to keep in mind that all of Trump's minions descended on Georgia. It's a stump all over the state for Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. And so I'm seeing all these people out on the campaign trail, and they're like, you got to keep fighting for President Trump. And this is in December.
Yeah.
This is nuts. This is nuts. This is well after the election, like several weeks. He's, lodging all of these lawsuits, contesting everything everywhere. And in Georgia, they're saying, we still have tricks up our sleeves. We still have cards to play. I remember being at this one event with Madison Cawthorn, Byron Donalds, and Tommy Tuberville. And Madison was on stage saying, we still have tricks up our sleeve. And, Tommy Tuberville gets on stage is like, y'all keep fighting for President Trump. Don't give up now. Don't give up on him. And so when he comes down, I'm like, Senator, what can you do? I'm chasing him out the door, and I had a mask on at the time.
Everyone did. Yeah.
Well, you think everyone did. This is Atlanta, Georgia, so not everyone did. I stuck out a little bit, and he almost didn't talk to me. He was like, you're going to have to take that off. And as soon as I took it off, he was like smiling at me and, okay, hey. But I was like, what are you going to do to, fight for President Trump? He was, well, you see what they're doing over in the House. We're going to have to do it in the Senate, too. Da-da-da. So it made huge news. It was all over CNN and MSNBC, local news. And a couple days later, I talked to David Perdue and asked him the same question. What are you going to do to fight for President Trump? Are you going to challenge the Electoral College like Tommy Tuberville? And he was like, yes, ma'am, I am. I didn't have the audio on that because my camera malfunctioned, unfortunately. Yeah. But I had gotten a picture with him in the photo line. And so I contacted a couple of reporters, and I'm like, oh my God, he told me this. I totally got the story, but I don't have it because I don't have the audio. I don't have the video. And they're like, well, you can report it out as like, that's what he told you.
Yeah.
Give as much proof as you have. Like, if that's what he said, you can say it. And so I was like, yeah, you're right. And so I posted the photo of me with him and, said, what he told me, and Trump tweeted out both stories.
Right. Rather than contesting it, they actually go, great, let's get this out there. And let me just say one thing, Lauren, is that as you heard her, listeners, as you heard her slip a little bit more into her Southern drawl, what we haven't quite said yet, Lauren, is that when you are confronting folks, in this case, like Tuberville and Perdue and so on, you give them clear indications that you are on their side and that you need encouragement from them about the fight you're in with them together. Your goal is to have them assume you are one of them, and that seems to help open up the floodgates.
Yeah, the whole thing is employing a bit of, psychology, right? You're wanting to really impart to someone, I am with you.
Right.
We are on the same side. You can trust me. Going into it, I wasn't like, you know what? I bet if I thrust a camera and a microphone in someone's face, they're going to tell me all about how they plan to overturn the election.
Right.
You know, to do it from a straight reporting standpoint, to me, we had a limited amount of time. The stakes were very high, and I felt like preserving democracy was worth it. And it worked. It's amazing what people will tell you when they don't think they're on camera.
You originally, when you're bird dogging, it's very obvious you have a camera and a mic. Now that you're undercover, which begins there and continues up to the present, you have a hidden camera and mic, correct?
Yes.
Where does it fit? How big is it? Just so people can get kind of a sense of.
I employ a variety of techniques. I will decline to go into it
Good.
in depth, but I've used a variety of types of hidden cameras.
Okay, so that's the 2020 situation in which you're one of the people who gets behind enemy lines, as you will, and find senators who are going to take this to the next step. You continue in this mode during the Biden administration, and now I'd say your biggest scoops have been, and this is just my take, with the Supreme Court Justice Alito and his wife, and then with people who are planning for insurrection or January 6.2, like Roger Stone. The documentary is so hot off the editing bay that these are in it.
Yes, that's what's made this entire process very challenging.
Sure.
A
moving target.
Producing something, you're building the plane as you fly it,
yep.
Right? It's like, okay, we've got to continue to report, but we're making movies, so the script is going to change, but we can't really make the movie if we don't have the fundraising, and we can't really get the fundraising in without getting the scoops. So then we have to use some of the scoops, but then we've lost those, but then we need new ones so that when we put the movie out, there's something like new and fresh and exciting that people can be like, oh, wow,
Right. So, something beyond there's a new documentary out. It's like the Roger Stone scoop from a week and a half ago. Okay. And then that will be in this new movie. You need the scoop to get people to want to read about the movie.
Well, the whole thing was it's a media narrative project. So it's like, can we report and break scoops? And oh, by the way, we can deliver like a comprehensive sort of narrative about the entire body of work in a separate vehicle of the documentary.
And also, as I said, about the context in which this work is happening. Both yes. The context among the American people, the context among the American right, etc.
I think you're exactly right. The biggest story for sure was the Alito story. Prior to that had been John Eastman,
yep.
the coup attorney who devised the fake elector scheme. The Alito story took 2 years. The first event that I went to was in June of 2023. And that was spurred on by this ProPublica reporting on Clarence Thomas. I had known that he attended the Supreme Court Historical Society event. I had read about the event in a New York Times article about this anti-abortion activist who used the Historical Society to lobby the justices.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading it and just being like, oh, liberals should do that. We should be lobbying the Supreme Court justices in that way. And I just thought that would be a really good, opportunity at some point to try to talk to justice. And once the Clarence Thomas stuff happened with ProPublica, it's like, oh, well, I should see if I can go talk to him. What will he say if I ask him some pointed questions?
In what he considers a friendly environment.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to consider that this is the cocoon of the court.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we say the Supreme Court Historical Society dinner, the gala, it's not some separate building. It's actually held in the court in
wow.
this grand hall in front of the chambers. So, you're not, this is their home.
Yeah.
There's security that you have to go through to get in. And it wasn't the inner sanctum of the court itself.
But it was the outer sanctum.
Yeah, it was the outer sanctum for sure. And I think that first year, there were more justices in attendance. In 2024, there were only 3. It was pretty wild that first year. Seeing so many of them, meeting them like in the wild. It felt like it was almost on like jurisprudential safari or something. A turn and oh my God, there's Brett Kavanaugh. That's insane. Oh my God, there's Amy Coney Barrett. The guidelines they issue for the event from the society say that you're not to engage the justices in any political conversation. You can't engage them in anything that's a case before the court.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really hard to know what the lines were. Do not cross. You could be kicked out, asked to leave the event, or be thrown out of this society entirely. So that first year I was really finding my bearings. I talked to Alito and we had a conversation about the polarization in this country. I was able to push it a little bit further and ask him about the leaker, for Dobbs. Right. I made it very clear that I was an observant Catholic and appreciated his work on Dobbs so much. And, were you able to find the leaker?
Mm-hmm.
No. It was interesting, but it wasn't newsworthy.
Right.
I didn't want to burn that bridge. And so I waited to go this year. And in that time, Alito, faced so much more harsh scrutiny. It just so happened to be very serendipitous from a news perspective that it was a couple of weeks before the gala that Alito and his wife were in this firestorm over political flags that they'd flown at their house and their vacation house. So one of the factors that really drove the Alito story was that I was able to talk to his wife, Martha Ann, for an extended amount of time. And she said some very unguarded things, very colorful. And she, without having talked to her, the story would not have been as big as it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did talk to Justice John Roberts too. And the way that I packaged the story was to really present what Alito said in contrast to what Justice Roberts said. And that really, I think, helped to tamp down. I still faced a huge amount of criticism for this. Don't get me wrong. There were pearl clutchers being like, this is, such a huge offense, against journalism, against the court, da, da, da. And there were a lot of people that defended me who said, no, this was absolutely necessary given everything that's gone on with the court and this is the shroud of secrecy. But being able to juxtapose the extremity of what Alito said with much more proper response from Chief Justice Roberts was really key to the success of that story.
I agree. I agree, by the way. And let me just reemphasize what she's saying. She interviews both of them. She asks about similar turf, and Roberts gives the, if you will, prescribed answers. He's not willing to talk about anything political. He's very bureaucratic in what he says and so on. So then the contrast with Alito, who can't control his passions to the same extent that John Roberts can. You agree that's...
Yes.
Yeah. But it helped, journalistically, it helps your story a great deal.
Because I know the criticism that I will face of, oh, you're just the left-wing James O'Keefe. Yeah, I'm not. James O'Keefe didn't invent undercover journalism.
Right.
I have to say this over and over to people because
For folks who don't remember James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, disguises, carefully edited videos, and so on.
Yes, and I actually have history with him. You mentioned Project Veritas Exposed. He infiltrated my office in 2016.
Yeah.
We sued in 2017 and won. I guess it was like in 2022 now. It's forever ago. We still haven't gotten the money that we were awarded.
Oh.
But, we did. I think we were successful on a number of fronts, given that we won the case and Project Veritas basically no longer exists.
That's right.
O'Keefe was forced out. I don't want to make this a story about O'Keefe, but to say that I hear this criticism all the time, and I definitely go out of my way to be as forthcoming with context to these conversations as possible with minimal edits. I might cut off the front or the end if the conversation isn't relevant, or where it's like obscuring details of someone who should be undercover, like personal details. But for the most part, I try to really present the entirety of an interaction from beginning to end. It's harder when you have a longer interaction, right? Like if I talk to somebody for like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, you're not going to post like a 20-minute video. There's a lot of stuff that people just aren't going to be interested in. So you cut to like the relevant portion. Whatever I'm presenting, my number one goal is to not have any internal cuts in whatever the clip is.
Right. So that what people see shows, here's the question, here's the answer, rather than what Project Veritas did, which was chop and cherry pick and basically create an event rather than record an event.
Yeah, there's times that things aren't newsworthy, and it doesn't do me any to portray something in a false light.
Right.
It would only destroy my credibility. So to the degree that I can be as honest and as forthcoming as possible, that's what I really strive for. Not trying to be deceptive in what I'm doing here. I'm trying to get people on the record about what their motives are, because as a public servant, I think that accountability is owed to the public, right? So a big difference between me and James O'Keefe is like I'm going after, actual office holders and people who are public servants, whereas the majority of the time you see his expose and it's mid-level managers and staffers,
Right.
I talked to Justice Alito,
Right.
Roger Stone is not a public servant, but he's
a public figure for sure.
Very close advisor. Yeah, hugely public figure who has the ear of the president. So when determining who to try to talk to go undercover with, I definitely try to think about it in terms of like, is this in the public interest? I wouldn't want to just try to destroy somebody's life, which is what a lot of people of that ilk have done to people on the left. And it's been devastating for a lot of people. When I was producing that website in the heyday of it, I did a lot of victim outreach, and it was really depressing and very sad to talk to people whose lives had been upended by
Project Veritas.
Yes, like being stung by Project Veritas destroyed their lives. And, I don't think that my undercover work has destroyed anyone's life per se. It has brought accountability to people's lives, like
or at least the possibility of accountability.
Well, John Eastman, for example, is facing disbarment.
Yep.
So he's been recommended to be disbarred. He's suspended. And I've heard from many people who've said, like, I don't think that would have happened without your reporting.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the reason why I have gone after attorneys in this journey, this gonzo journey, was politicians have a different like slipperiness about them to be able to evade accountability, right? Because like as long as they get elected and as long as they can spin it, so long as what they did wasn't illegal, it's just a lot harder to hold them accountable. Like someone like Ted Cruz, for example, will he be held accountable in this run this year? We'll see if Colin Allred is able to capitalize on Ted Cruz's role. I did a lot of reporting on Cruz to show his role in January 6th, but with lawyers, they have a professional code of ethics, and with the professional code of ethics, being able to expose any sort of crimes they've taken part in, it's easier to hold them to account, obviously, because the law is a totally different standard than a political standard. Right.
In other words, the politician, as long as he can get a majority of the votes of the public who is less informed, he survives. A lawyer has a profession to deal with until they get to the Supreme Court.
Obviously, politicians are also subject to the law, but I guess what I mean, absent for actual criminal prosecution, the only way to hold an account at the ballot box. Right?
Yeah.
I didn't go undercover with Rudy. That was a straight bird dog. So I talked to him in the in Atlanta in the state capitol when he was presenting to like the election committee when they were contesting the vote in Atlanta. I think it was like December 5th, I want to say.
Uh-huh.
But I talked to him there and asked him if he had asked President Trump for a pardon. And have you committed any crimes that you would need a pardon for? Well, of course not. That's an insulting question. But I staked out his apartment when I was starting the documentary. I did a workshop with New York Film Academy last summer, so August of 2023, and produced a mini documentary that really served as a basis for this called Rudy and Me, playing off of the classic documentary Roger and Me.
Yep.
But I broke a big story with Rudy at the end of his... Actually, I talked to him when the verdict came down on the defamation case. I basically like owned him. Like as soon as he stepped away from the like press conference he was giving, I was in the scrum and had him the entire time walking away from scrum to his car. And I asked him, like, was it worth it? Why did you risk? You're America's mayor. Why'd you risk it all for Donald Trump? What did Donald Trump do for you? And we got it on Joy Reid. I
said we would talk about a number of stories. Your film lays out the context in which these battles are taking place, and the agendas of the what I call Christian nationalist, white supremacist, anti-democratic minority rule folks. But anybody who listens to this podcast has heard that many times. Instead, let me ask you kind of a final question, which is your scoops. As you said, you might record for 10 minutes, you might record for 5 minutes, sometimes 2 or 3 minutes. That's what the public ends up seeing. But you have spent weekends in far-right gatherings, whole days in far-right gatherings and so on. Talk just a little bit about that experience. And my guess is during that experience, even though you're not scooping someone undercover at that point, you basically stay within your role, I would imagine, of a fellow traveler. So what has that been like for you, and what have you learned?
I grew up in the South in a really, mostly conservative state. I grew up in Nashville, which was a more progressive city. I remember having a Democratic mayor when, I guess, in middle school or high school. So it wasn't totally red, but it was red enough, very politically conservative, religious conservative. It's not they're not foreign waters for me to swim in by any means, but I'm someone who, though I grew up in the South, very quickly realized that I wanted to live in New York and live in Los Angeles, live in a big city. It's not my environment. I'm agnostic. I am a liberal. I definitely, California is much more my philosophical, spiritual home. And so when I'm swimming in those waters, it's not entirely comfortable, but it's familiar because I grew up in that. And I go back to see family and friends. Sure. And I know a lot of people, family and friends, who are Trump supporters. So I know how to talk to them. I know how they talk about things. It's not hard to play as one of them. It's a familiar role. I just think about what my friends or family who support Trump or support Republicans, how they would approach something and just take on that persona.
I can imagine that. Yeah, you basically, you can be successfully undercover being your cousin or something, right? Basically. You know what I'm saying?
It's kind of like an amalgam of different things. Yeah. People that I grew up with.
Yeah, I grew up in the South myself, left north to college. And
whereabouts?
In Florida, which at that point wasn't Alabama, but it might have been Nashville. I was in Jacksonville for 5 years, which is, just a few miles from the Georgia border. And I went away to college and then moved to California. And I've gone back many times. My family moved to Atlanta in 1970. So basically, when I go home to family, it's to Atlanta. So I understand what you're saying. When I am thinking about the right, I remember sometimes just, the kind of conversations me and my high school buddies would have,
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bring it to a close. Again, the new documentary is Gonzo for Democracy. The websites are Lauren Windsor, LaurenWindsor, laurenwindsor.com, theundercurrent.tv, and the Undercurrent channel on YouTube, where you can watch the trailer for Gonzo for Democracy right now, and where the full film will be streaming for free later this week. For this conversation and many other interviews and articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to terrencemcnally.net, TerrenceMcNally.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email newsletter telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and links to 10 or 15 articles, email me at TEMcNally, TEMCNALLY, at mac.com. You can subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast on my site, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on most of those major podcast sites. You'll find years of podcasts there and at my site. Michael Lewis, Jeremy Scahill, Naomi Klein, Robert Reich, Connie Rice, Greg Boyle. You can also follow me on Twitter at McNally Terrence. You can follow Lauren on Twitter at
LA Windsor.
LA Windsor. Very good. And thanks to Kiana Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all, you, my listeners, please share this podcast widely. And finally, thank you, Lauren Windsor, and keep up your good work.
Thank you so much, Terrence.
Okay, great talking to you.
Likewise.